What happens when a leader's desperation for legacy leads him to gamble everything? For 25 years, Vladimir Putin has held the reins of Russia, forever committed to presenting himself as the nation's indomitable ruler. His narrative? He's the unwavering protector of traditional values, the guardian of sovereignty. But now, as the walls close in, even the Kremlin can't hide the unraveling. The truth? This downfall is entirely his own doing. Recently celebrating his 73rd birthday, Putin had ample opportunity to extend his reign for years to come, potentially into his 80s. All he needed to do was stick to the successful playbook that kept him popular both at home and abroad. Yet, foolhardy decisions and arrogance have landed him in a quagmire so deep that escape seems impossible, not to mention the impact of his costly misjudgment that began in early 2022. In an audacious attempt to extend his grasp, Putin initiated the invasion of Ukraine. He cloaked this aggressive maneuver with absurd claims of neo-Nazis taking power, painting a false picture of a noble mission. But the international community recognized this for what it was, a reckless bid to satiate his relentless ambition for expansion. Think he underestimated his rival? Absolutely. With a robust military flaunting tanks, missiles, and armored vehicles, Putin believed a swift victory was inevitable. He envisioned Russian banners unfurling in Kiev within mere days. However, the reality unfolded drastically differently. Ukraine's fierce resistance stunned him. Citizens, alongside trained soldiers, rallied in defense of their homeland with an unwavering spirit. Despite gaining initial ground, the Russian military quickly faltered. The anticipated swift triumph turned into protracted conflict, with Ukrainian forces reclaiming territory and launching counterstrikes that humiliated the Kremlin on its own land. The tide shifted, and Putin's ambitions crumbled like a house of cards. With every failed advance, the resilience of Ukraine intensified. As it strategically fortified its defenses and executed targeted strikes, Russia found itself spiraling into disarray, facing profound economic turmoil and an alarming energy crisis. The toll of war has been staggering, with the Russian army suffering heavy casualties. Recent estimates indicate over 1.1 million losses, including 332,000 dead or wounded within a single year. Sanctions imposed by the West have further crippled Russia's economy, isolating it globally. Still, amidst all this, Putin spins a narrative of victory and valor, desperately attempting to control the information flowing to his people. He must know, however, that with each passing day, the weight of truth grows heavier, and the facade cracks further. Polling indicates a significant shift in public sentiment. 66% of Russians now lean towards negotiation over continued war, with younger generations showing even greater desire for peace. As the war's toll becomes increasingly personal, it is no wonder resentment towards Putin grows. As fatigue and frustration swell among elites and citizens alike, his grip on power precariously hangs in the balance. But how long can he maintain this charade? Can the myth of an inevitable victory survive the mounting evidence of failure? Only time will tell, but the foundations of this regime tremble as the reality of war brews discontent, raising ominous questions about the future of Russia and its leader. In a world replete with treachery and ambition, one man's insatiable quest for power turned into a horrifying miscalculation. Vladimir Putin, the seasoned ruler of Russia, believed that expanding his empire was merely a matter of seizing opportunity. As he launched his troops into Ukraine, whispering lies about a fabricated Nazi threat, he underestimated the resilience of a nation. What followed was a defiance that no one, not even he, could foresee. Expecting a swift conquest, Putin was certain his might would shatter Ukrainian resistance in mere days. Military tanks thundered towards Kiev, and it appeared victory was assured. But Ukraine, a land of fierce pride and indomitable spirit, had other plans. From bustling cities to tranquil villages, its people unified like lions, armed with determination rather than mere weapons. Ordinary civilians became warriors, boldly standing their ground against the advancing tide of Russian forces. Putin's vision of a quick triumph evaporated as the nights turned into weeks, and the battlefield shifted. What once seemed a straightforward march for dominance transformed into a fierce struggle of wills. Ukraine retaliated, reclaiming territory lost to invaders. The Ukrainians, more than just defenders of their homeland, became the embodiment of courage. The tide shifted dramatically, pride replaced despair as they began to push back, even daring to strike deep into Russian territory. As victory danced just beyond Putin's reach, the consequences of his hubris rippled across Russia. The war has exacted a heavy toll, plunging the nation into turmoil while its people grappled with a spiraling economy. A staggering fuel crisis loomed large, crippling daily life and laying bare the devastating realities of war. Russian households found themselves grappling with soaring prices, their pockets emptied as ambitions faltered. Droning in from the skies, Ukrainian missiles targeted high-value assets and ignited fury, igniting flames of defiance even further. The vivid sounds of explosions reverberated through the hearts of both nations, shattering illusions of invincibility. With more than 1.1 million casualties reported, the scars of conflict deepened. The once untouchable image of Putin crumbled as citizens endured loss, heartbreak, and uncertainty. As Putin continued to grapple with the fallout of his decisions, whispers of dissent echoed through the corridors of power. Russian elites, once loyal supporters, now shared a growing sense of frustration. The fabric of their society began to tear, thread by thread, as hope slipped further away. Ensnared within an unending war, captured by a relentless cycle of conflict, how long before even the strongest facade faltered? This reality became evident, even to the Kremlin. The walls began to close in as Putin's control tightened around information, attempting to smother the truth. But can a ruler silence the cries of a country? With every announcement promising imminent victory slipping into disillusionment, a brewing storm threatened to unleash a wave of change. What will the future hold for a leader clinging to a vast crumbling empire? The answer hung in the balance. And reality echoed louder than any propaganda could ever achieve. The shocking truth is out: Vladimir Putin, the iron-fisted ruler of Russia for 25 years, unleashed disaster on his own nation. Can one man's greed really shatter an empire? Imagine the thunderous roar of missiles slicing through the night sky, the acrid smoke choking the air, and the rough grip of fear tightening around every Russian soul. In the previous segment, we saw how Putin's grand invasion of Ukraine backfired spectacularly. His colossal army stumbled against unexpected resistance, and now Ukraine strikes back hard, targeting Russia's heart with deep drone attacks and missile barrages. The fallout screams devastation, with Russia's economy in utter chaos and a fuel shortage gripping the land like icy claws. Oil production slashed to a fraction of its might. Citizens shelling out double for fuel and basics compared to last year. Drones and missiles grow fiercer by the day, no region dares to breathe easy. This brutal war crashed right into Russia's doorstep, far worse than any Kremlin nightmare. Casualties hit the horror mark, over 1.1 million, with 332,000 Russians dead or wounded just in 2025. Per British Defense Ministry. Daily tolls rise. Ukrainian reports clock 950 more Russians lost each day. Isolation bites deep too. Europe and North America slammed sanctions, crippling the economy, severing bank links, leaving people and leaders floating in void. Each blow traces back to Putin's hubris. He craved more power, believed he could snatch Ukrainian lands without cost. Spoiled by lifelong wins, he ignored the madness. Now he stares at the wreckage. Russians see it clear. War-weary and furious at his stubborn hold. Polls from the Levada Center scream rebellion, 2/3. 66% beg for peace talks over endless bloodshed. Even sharper cries: 74% of women, 80% of youth under 24. Yearn for ceasefires. Only 27% still cling to war's dark promise. War worms into lives. 58% feel its sting on self or kin. 1 in 5. 22% crushed by loss of loved ones, financial ruin, shattered bonds, mental anguish echoing in empty homes. High-ups seethe too: elites, oligarchs, generals, exhausted, bitter over Putin's mismanagements. Dissent festers, eroding his grip. He clamps down harder, censoring news, spewing speech after speech: war is noble, victory looms, survivors died heroically. Lies crumble under weight of time. Summer offensive flopped, banners promised Donetsk's fall, tanks roared, drones buzzed, recruits charged. Putin boasted Ukraine's doom, propaganda hailed breakthroughs by year's end. Reality? Stalemate, slivers of land in Luhansk and Donetsk. Pokrovsk and Avdiivka fortress belts hold firm. Analysts predict years, no, decades, to grasp Donbass, unthinkable for full Ukraine takeover. Losses pile, promises broken, faith in Putin's regime dwindles to embers. Could this be the moment history flips? As whispers of betrayal grow, will Putin face unthinkable fate? Tension coils, flames about to leap. What hidden spark will ignite the final reckoning? Two-thirds of the Russian population now yearns for peace. A shocking poll reveals that 66% of individuals prefer negotiations over ongoing warfare. Among them, an astounding 74% of women and 80% of young people under 24 advocate for diplomatic talks instead of continued fighting. But what does this reveal about the pressure building within the hearts of Russians? The statistics paint a grim picture. 58% of Russians recognize the war's toll on their lives or their families, with 22% claiming to be significantly affected. Loss of loved ones, financial strain, and emotional distress have cast long shadows over homes. These aren't just numbers, they represent lives shattered by conflict. Imagine the echoes of empty chairs at dinner tables and the palpable tension in rooms where sorrow lingers. The war has dug a deep chasm in the fabric of society. Even those atop the hierarchy, oligarchs and generals, whisper of fatigue and disappointment. Could discontent at the highest echelon signal a storm brewing for the man who sits at the helm? As frustrations mount, Putin's grip twists tighter, striving to sculpt a narrative that the conflict is a noble endeavor. Yet, the facade is cracking. His grand speeches echo hollow against the backdrop of prolonged struggle. As the months tick by, the hardship intensifies and economic strain gnaws at the nation. The anticipated grand summer offensive, a promised swift victory, fizzled into yet another disappointment, leaving Russia in a quagmire. With the ground barely changing hands, hope for a quick resolution fades. Is this the end of an era for Putin? Or merely the beginning of a reckoning? Despite the orchestrated displays of strength, the truth remains, Russian warriors on sacred soil falter while Ukrainians channel resolve and resilience. With each passing day, who will take the lead in shaping the future? Will the people rise and demand an end to this ordeal? As rising voices echo within the populace, the Kremlin's ability to maintain its narrative weakens. Will this growing sense of disillusionment spark a revolutionary change? In the face of daily realities, the question lingers, how much longer can the Kremlin dismiss the cries for peace? Amidst the chaos of war, President Vladimir Putin aimed to conquer Ukraine. In the summer of this fateful year, he declared a massive offensive, promising that it would be the decisive moment for Russia. The sun warmed the ground, where soldiers loaded tanks, artillery, and drones, marching into battle full of bravado. Ukraine will fall, they claimed, rallying under the banner of glory portrayed by pro-Kremlin media. However, this was a facade. Why had the so-called invincible Russian army misjudged its enemy? As the initial waves of the offensive rolled forth, hope was high. Yet, week by week, the Russian advancement faltered, leaving them in a stagnation that felt all too familiar. Those key territories, vital to control, slipped further from their grasp like sand through fingers. The industrial hub of Pokrovsk remained out of reach, a constant reminder of failure mocking their every move. Despite proclamations of triumph, the reality was stark. Ukrainian spirit ignited, defending their homeland with immense valor. The fortress cities of Kramatorsk and Slaviansk stood firm, strengthening the resolve of Ukrainian forces. Meanwhile, Russian casualties mounted each day saw more families devastated by loss. As years dragged on, analysts began to assert it could take Russia far longer than anticipated to secure even a fragile grasp on the Donbas region. The dream of full control over Ukraine was quickly slipping away, leaving only despair as proof of overreach. Putin's promises began to ring hollow. Each time he declared victory was nigh, it seemed further from reality. Trust in his leadership eroded dangerously. Desperation gripped his administration, squeezing harder with each passing failure. Would this mark the beginning of the end for his regime? A storm of dissent brewed as the public grew increasingly weary of the war. Inside Russia, whispers emerged. Opposition politicians forecast that another failed offensive could finally force Putin's hand, beckoning the possibility of an end to the conflict. Would the iron grip of the Kremlin loosen? The people, tired of sacrifice and loss, called for negotiations. As the scent of uncertainty hung heavy in the air, hope flickered. Could this collective yearning for peace be the turning point in a narrative filled with strife? The moment was poised for change, and so many began to wonder, what would come next? In a world where power once seemed unshakable, the reign of Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin, is teetering on the edge. For a staggering 25 years, he ruled with an iron grip, crafting an image as the staunch protector of traditional values and national pride. But as the tides of war ebb and flow, his facade is unraveling, revealing a stark reality that even the Kremlin can no longer mask. What if I told you that a single decision made in 2022 set the world on a catastrophic trajectory? Seeking to expand his power, Putin launched a bold invasion of Ukraine. His rationale? A fabricated narrative of Nazis threatening his neighbor. The truth, as the world quickly saw, was a hunger for land and influence, a gamble that would lead to unforeseen consequences. Initially, it seemed like a swift strike would bring victory within days. With tanks rumbling and troops advancing, it appeared unstoppable. But what followed was a fierce resistance unlike any liberal optimism could predict. Ukrainian civilians and soldiers united, turning the tables on the Russian forces, who underestimated the fire of a nation defending its homeland. With the shock of combat ringing in their ears, the beleaguered Russian troops soon found themselves stuck in a quagmire, their advance faltering as the brave Ukrainian spirit surged. As the months rolled on, reports revealed a grim tally of Russian casualties exceeding 1.1 million, a reminder of the steep price of Putin's arrogance. Struggling economically and politically, the Kremlin's grip is slipping as dissatisfaction grows among the Russian populace. Fast forward to the present day. Putin faces a stark ultimatum: will he continue down the path of destruction, or will he reconsider his choices? Recent assessments suggest that the next few weeks could pivotally alter the course of this protracted conflict, with opposition voices within Russia warning that yet another failed offensive could lead to calls for negotiations, maybe even a ceasefire. But now, as thousands of troops are summoned with promises of riches and glory, desperation is palpable. Can this renewed offensive finally break Ukraine's hardened defenses? Or will this be just another futile push in a war that has claimed far too much already? The echoes of conflict fill the air, each side quaking with uncertainty. The stakes have never been higher, the tension sharper. For the next 2 months, the battle for the Donbass will reach its climax, determining not just the fate of that region, but possibly reshaping the future of the entire Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Will Putin's ambitions lead to triumph, or will they mark the beginning of his downfall? As history hangs in the balance, only time will reveal the outcome of this relentless struggle. In the complex chess game of global power, the narrative surrounding Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, has become increasingly intricate. For 25 years, he has wielded control over Russia like a maestro conducting a symphony, using every tactic imaginable to hold onto his power. He envisioned his legacy as that of a heroic guardian of his nation, a champion of traditional values, and the architect of Russia's resurgence on the world stage. But now, cracks are emerging in his grand design. As the war in Ukraine rages on, it becomes painfully clear Putin's grip is slipping. He's trapped in a vicious cycle of his own making, struggling to maintain the illusion of power. Despite turning 73, he could have continued his reign under the facade of stability, but a pivotal blunder changed everything. In early 2022, in a quest for expansion and dominance, he initiated an invasion of Ukraine. Under the guise of a special military operation, he claimed to rescue a nation from supposed neo-Nazi control, but the world recognized the greed behind this audacious move. Initially, he predicted a swift victory, believing his military might would crush any resistance. However, the spirit of Ukraine's people proved more formidable than he anticipated. From soldiers to civilians, the resistance surged, rallying for their homeland with unmatched spirit and bravery. Rather than an easy march to Kiev, Putin faced an unexpected stalemate, while Ukraine began reclaiming territory, humiliating him by pushing his forces back. With each day, Russia's losses mounted, recently surpassing a staggering 700,000 casualties, an unprecedented figure born from Putin's hubris. The once powerful military machine began to falter as Ukraine adapted its strategies, leveraging support from allies and turning the tide in their favor. Economic hardships tightened their grip on Russia, as soaring fuel prices began to overshadow Putin's claims of resilience, leaving the public in disillusionment. But what of Putin's optimism? Amid plummeting morale and increasing frustration from his inner circle, he resorts to desperate measures, promising higher bonuses to enlist more troops while knowing his military's true capability is dwindling. Despite the Kremlin's continual spending, the resolve of the Ukrainian forces showcases a resilience that money alone cannot buy. Building upon their adaptability and innovative strategies, the Ukrainian defenders have thrived under pressure, complicating Russia's quest for dominance. As the war stretches on, the cracks in Putin's facade widen. In fact, a recent poll revealed that 66% of Russians desire peace talks rather than further military entanglement. The challenge has evolved from just territorial gain to a battle for the hearts and minds of the very people he strives to lead. With each failed offensive and every dropped promise, the foundation of Putin's power continues to erode. If he cannot deliver on victory soon, will he be forced to reckon with his own people's growing resentment? The next chapter of this geopolitical saga will be fraught with uncertainty, but one thing becomes clear: the longer this struggle persists, the more Putin's grasp on power might merely be an illusion, unraveling right before our eyes. What if the leader of a powerful nation was no longer in control, teetering on the edge of failure? Vladimir Putin, the man who has ruled Russia with an iron grip for over 25 years, is facing unprecedented challenges. With tension mounting and support dwindling, he finds himself in a precarious position. Once hailed as the guardian of state, his grasp on power is slipping, and the world watches as his ambitions crumble. How did it all come to this? Putin's quest for glory led him to invade Ukraine, believing it would be a swift victory. He justified his actions with absurd claims, fabricating a narrative of liberation against supposed tyranny. But reality painted a starkly different picture. The Ukrainian spirit, resilient and fierce, rose up against the aggressors. Citizens, not just soldiers, took up arms, determined to defend their homeland. The initial days of the invasion saw some Russian advances, but Ukraine quickly turned the tide. As the weeks rolled into months, Ukraine became a nightmare for Russian forces. Their invasion stalled, exposed to fierce resistance, and the hopes of a quick victory faded away. Each failed advance deepened Putin's desperation. Yet, with frustration bubbling beneath the surface, he held a firm facade, determined to control the narrative. Inside Russia, dissent began to grow. Polls indicated a staggering shift: 2/3 of Russians desired an end to the bloodshed. No longer could he dismiss the growing fatigue that echoed through the streets, where families mourned losses and felt the weight of economic strain. In the higher echelons of power, fatigue began to seep into conversations. Elite members wondered if Putin's decisions had led them astray. Should he attempt to pause the conflict, the political ramifications could be dire. Or could he forge a peace deal that would allow him to save face, even at the cost of future turmoil? Ultimately, time is running out. With each passing day, the calls for negotiations grow louder. How will Putin navigate this shifting landscape? Will he find a way to re-establish control, or will this tumultuous chapter in Russian history mark the beginning of his unraveling? With uncertainty looming and the stakes higher than ever, the world waits in anxious anticipation. What choice will he make? Imagine this: what if the mighty bear of Russia, once feared across the globe, is now cornered in its own den, claws dulled by its own fury? After 25 years of iron rule, President Vladimir Putin faces a crumbling empire he built himself. 1.1 million casualties, fuel prices doubled, and 66% of Russians craving peace. Could his desperate grab for Ukraine's land finally topple the throne? Dive into the shocking unraveling that's humiliating a dictator on the world stage. 347 characters, flashback to a crisp Moscow morning in early 2022. The air hung heavy with the sharp scent of fresh snow, biting cold nipping at gloved hands as Putin gazed out from the Kremlin, the low rumble of distant engines echoing his resolve. He could almost taste victory, the metallic tang of triumph. But that fleeting warmth of power? It melted into the icy dread that's gripped him ever since. Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin, has held the reins for a quarter century. He's shaped the nation with unyielding control, extending his time at the top through cunning maneuvers that silenced challengers. Driven by a burning desire to etch his name as Russia's supreme savior, he's cast himself as the fierce protector of age-old customs, the unbreakable shield of independence, and the sole guide to elevate this sprawling powerhouse to unmatched splendor. Yet, nothing lasts forever. Putin's grip is fraying at the edges, the cracks too wide for even the Kremlin's shadows to hide. The bitter truth stings worst: this downfall is his creation. At 73, fresh from birthday toasts, he might have steered Russia onward for decades. Maybe into his 80s or further. Just stick to the script that fueled his rise: popularity at home, dominance abroad. But now? He's buried in a pit of his making, allies in bold words, useless shovels. Reckless choices, soaring pride, and one colossal blunder sealed it. Rewind to spring 2022, Putin's command reshaped the world, sending forces across the border into neighboring Ukraine to swell his domain. He spun tales of rescuing from imagined threats, but the globe saw raw ambition, a hunger for territory, riches, sway. He craved it all, no price too steep. His fatal error? Underestimating the storm. Russia's arsenal gleamed, endless tanks grinding over mud, armored beasts roaring, missiles slicing skies. Facing Ukraine's smaller force, Putin envisioned a blitz, troops sweeping to the capital, flags waving in days, weeks tops. Reality shattered that dream. Ukraine stood like an unyielding oak, roots deep in resolve. Citizens, not just warriors, grabbed what they could, hearts pounding with defiant fire, the acrid smoke of resistance thick in the air. The nation roared back, no surrender in sight. Early gains fizzled, advances halted like a stalled engine. Ukraine countered, reclaiming soil, even piercing Russian borders, stealing land, rubbing salt in the wound on home ground. Growing bolder, they unleashed precision hits, drones humming like vengeful bees, missiles cracking the night, targeting vital sites. The fallout? Russia's economy reels, a fuel shortage choking the land, prices for gas and essentials doubled in a year, the sour reek of scarcity in every queue. Oil output slashed. Regions tremble under buzzing threats. No corner feels secure, war's chill seeps into Russian homes, far beyond worst fears. Losses mount grimly, over 1.1 million hurt or gone, with British reports noting 332,000 Russian tolls in 2025 alone. Ukrainian tallies add 950 more daily, a relentless drumbeat of despair. Isolation bites. 2 European and North American sanctions strangle finances, banks severed, the world turning its back. All from Putin's arrogance. He eyed Ukraine's swaths as easy prizes for his throne. A life of unchallenged wins blinded him. Now, the wreckage glares back. Russians weary, polls from the Levada Center show 66% yearning for talks over clashes. Among women, 74%, youth under 24, 80%, just 27% back endless fight. War touches 58% personally, 22% deeply scarred, lost kin's echoes in empty rooms, finances crumbling like dry earth, bonds shattered, minds frayed by endless worry. Even elites tycoons, commanders whisper exhaustion, the weight of botched strategy heavy on shoulders. As resentment simmers, Putin's peril deepens. He clamps media, blocks truths, thunders in speeches of noble sacrifice and looming win. But the war drags, unseen burdens piling like winter snows. Lies pierce easier now. Summer's big push? Hailed as the finale, officers boasted of seizing Donetsk fully. Tanks thundered, drones swarmed under sunny skies, fresh recruits marching with forced cheers. Putin boasted of claiming all Ukraine, outlets like Pravda crowed breakthroughs by year's end. Yet, it sputtered, gains tiny, lines barely shifted in Luhansk, Donetsk. Pokrovsk's factories hold firm, Kramatorsk. Sloviansk's defenses endure. Experts say years for Donbass alone, decades for more. Losses climb, empty promises erode faith. Belief vanishes, history's will turns as Russia eyes a pause. In this prior stretch, Putin's summer gamble crumbled, leaving lines static and trust shattered, with Russians pleading for talks amid mounting woes. But can he claw back? What if a temporary truce was his sly trap? Picture Putin signing peace, only to lurk in shadows, ready to strike again when stars align. He'd pin blame on Ukraine breach of terms, some flimsy charge marching back across lines. Yet, even that twisted path grows thornier than his wildest doubts. Russia wilts, no triumphant surge, no foe crushed underfoot. Momentum? A ghost. Losses cascade like autumn leaves in a gale, each one a searing wound. The Kremlin can't swagger to the table, barking orders at Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, expecting bowed heads. Blame circles to Putin's flawed calls once more. Earlier this year, a window cracked open. U.S. President Donald Trump dialed leaders, nudging toward calm. Trump eased on Putin, leaning hard on Zelensky for compromise. The Russian chief could have grasped it, halting the spiral before deeper mire. He balked, another misstep. Now, repercussions lash back. Trump's ire boils, he vents frustration at Putin's deceptions, lately declaring online that Ukraine holds the edge to reclaim every inch seized. Aid surges, U.S. insights for drone precision, whispers of long-range Tomahawk missiles slicing distances. Reality's glare for Russians and watchers alike. Breakthroughs? Fading mirages. Casualties swell, economies whirl downward, crises breed like shadows at dusk. In this vortex, even Putin, the cunning survivor, twists reality to its breaking point. What's his next desperate gambit as the noose tightens? Out of arrogance that blinded him to reality, Vladimir Putin unleashed a storm that shattered his iron grip on power. As Russia's war machine grinds to a halt, casualties soar into the millions, and economic turmoil chokes the nation, even the master manipulator finds his options vanishing like smoke in the wind. What shocking secret is brewing in the shadows of the Kremlin, ready to topple him once and for all? Picture the bitter chill of a Petersburg winter, where the echo of boots on frost-hardened ground mixes with muffled chants rising from below the city's famed bridges. Hundreds of everyday Russians, their faces etched with defiance, dare to shatter the Kremlin's veil of lies. The scent of simmering tension, like burning tobacco, hung in the air as they defied censorship, their voices cutting through the frozen silence, a raw outcry against a war that devours their sons, their savings, their futures. Or imagine the deafening roar of missiles overhead, the acrid sting of smoke filling the lungs of soldiers in the blood-soaked fields of Donetsk. This so-called special operation has morphed into a relentless nightmare, Russia's catastrophic losses piling up like shattered armor on the snow, too vast for even the Kremlin's spin doctors to bury. Over 1 million lives torn asunder, the grim toll growing daily, each number a haunting reminder of hubris turned to horror. Now, as the darkness deepens, the question pierces the soul: can Putin survive the tide of resentment crashing against his throne? But hold on, what if the true twist lies not in defeat, but in betrayal from within, a final epic upheaval that erases his legacy forever? Watch as the tables turn in this staggering revelation, leaving the world breathless.